Hello, and welcome. I'm Dr. Rohl, Professor of History, Archaeology, and Digital Humanities at Calvin University. This video, which was produced in my 2020 COVID-19 basement office, has been put together as a basic introduction to some key and closely related terms that people often confuse for each other. Those terms today are going to be history, archaeology, and the past. Now, these three terms are obviously connected, and they overlap in really significant ways, but they do require a little bit of definition and distinction. For this reason, I give a version of this introduction as one of the first lectures in each of my courses in history and/or archaeology. Now, it's worth noting at the outset that the definitions and distinctions that I'm going to provide here are mine, and that there will no doubt be other archaeologists and historians who might disagree with me on some of these aspects. And that's okay. I mean, I'm obviously right, of course, but good scholars and teachers disagree all the time. Now, many students have found this explanation of the differences between these terms to be quite useful, and it is really helpful for students to understand my perspective if you're taking one of my courses. Overall, though, this video, this introduction is designed to be an initial launching pad into a deeper and more critical engagement with the past, and to outline some of the key ways that have been developed to step into such an engagement. Now let's start by thinking about time. And let me first say that the nature of time remains a significant matter of debate, with really interesting ideas and complications thrown around by philosophers and physicists. And time can be viewed as linear, cyclical, or even as an illusion altogether. And I'm aware of and really fascinated by these debates. And I do enjoy thinking through various possibilities as part of my own work in archaeological theory. For now, though, we're going to assume a basically linear view of time. And if we think about time as something that is constantly moving, we can break it down into three separate units: the past, the present, and the future. And we live in the present, the here and now. And because time is constantly moving through this line, the present is ever changing from now to new now. And the past is composed of everything, every event, and every moment that has ever existed or ever happened, all the way from the very beginning of time, if there is such a thing as a beginning of time, up until this very moment. The past, therefore, includes that moment in which our planet was created or came into being. It includes the time when the dinosaurs walked the earth, when human beings first developed speech, when people first migrated to the New World, as well as more recent events like Donald Trump's inauguration, last week's mac and cheese dinner, my morning cup of tea, and even just 1 minute ago, when I told you that the past is composed of everything, every event, and every moment that has ever existed or happened, all the way from the very beginning of time up until this very moment. So we live here in the present, the here and now, the right here and the right now. And the present is where we perpetually live. We cannot, as much as we might like to, go back to the past. And while we may be seen as moving forward into the future, we never really reach the future. Because the future is always lying just outside of our experience, as a set of possibilities beyond the present. And even though we might move forward in time, we move forward with the present, bringing it along with us. Or perhaps it's the present that is bringing us along with it. And from this perspective, the past is gone. The past is, it is something, indeed, it is everything that has already happened. And for better or worse, we cannot go back to the past. We cannot change it. We cannot correct its wrongs. And this can sometimes be painful as we remember the past and the things we've done. Maybe the things we didn't do, but wish we had. Or the things that were done to us. Or we might look back on loved ones or particular experiences and wish that we could just have one more chance to see them or experience that again. But the reality is that we can't. And as that great sage, Elsa of Arundel, wisely noted, the past is in the past. But even though we live perpetually in the present, and we work to achieve the dreams that we may have for the future, the past is constantly growing, and the past is inhabited by the memories and experiences, and by the people, places, things, and events of every new moment that passes in time, and that have led to this very moment. For these reasons, the past is of utmost importance to the present. And both history and archaeology are particularly focused upon the past. Confusingly, though, people often use the word history when what they really mean is the past. From the perspective I'm trying to outline here, history is not the things that have happened in the past. And it's not the same thing as the past itself. Old times are not history. Last week is not history. These are best referred to as the past. Now, history is perhaps best defined as humanity's documentation of the past. It is what we say about the past, the things that we choose to record, and the perspectives with which we present the particular elements of the past that we find worth passing along. Now, there is another way to look at history. That way is to think about it as an academic study of the past that seeks to create new accounts of the past based upon the documentary evidence that is available for it. And archaeology, on the other hand, while it's also concerned with the past, it creates its accounts and understandings of the past primarily based on the physical or material evidence that is left behind from the past. Although this sometimes includes documentary materials, most of the archaeological record consists of the leftover remains of human activities, the stuff we make, use, and dispose of. So, now that we've made that crucial distinction between the concepts of history and the past, and I've had some discussion about how archaeology plays into it, I want us to have a brief critical thinking moment about another very common saying, and that is that someone who has done something remarkable has made history. Now, this phrase has been used a lot in recent months. There's been a lot of talk about the history-making aspects of our current COVID-19 pandemic. And two other recent examples are worth highlighting here, though, and these both relate to the February 2020 Super Bowl. Now, I'm not a major sports fan. I am, however, an archaeologist and a historian, and this last February, I was really thinking through the comments that I was seeing in the news about the history-making aspects of the Super Bowl. So that's why I'm using it as an example here. Following February's win by the Kansas City Chiefs over the San Francisco 49ers in Super Bowl 54, hundreds of headlines proclaims that the Chiefs quarterback Patrick Mahomes had made history as the youngest player to ever win both the NFL's Most Valuable Player and the Super Bowl in the same year. And similarly, Katie Sowers, an offensive assistant coach for the 49ers, was said to have made history as both the first woman and the first openly LGBT coach at a Super Bowl. And in both the cases of Mahomes and Sowers, hundreds of headlines and many thousands of social media commentators remarked about the history-making accomplishments of these two remarkable individuals. But based upon the way that we've just distinguished between the past and history, did Mahomes and Sowers really make history? Certainly, they are remarkable people who accomplished remarkable things. But if history is humanity's documentation of the past, it is not necessarily those people who do remarkable things that make history, but those people who do the remarking about it. And in the case of Mahomes and Sowers, the people who have more properly made history here are all the journalists, photographers, TV analysts, and even the social media commentators who documented those accomplishments. In a very real way, you and I have just as much ability to make history, especially in our current digital world, as anyone who achieves remarkable things. Yes, remarkable people may often be the subjects of history, but the real history makers are those who do the documentation. Whether that's by writing about, photographing, filming, or otherwise recording events, things, thoughts, and responses to what's happening in our world today. So now, because archaeology is a little bit niche and it is too often grossly misunderstood, there are two misconceptions about what archaeology is that I think we really do need to dispel. The first is that archaeologists don't usually dig dinosaurs. Instead, that's the job of paleontologists, who do share some basic techniques and methods with archaeologists, but are actually a much different discipline. Now, you may note that I said that archaeologists don't usually dig dinosaurs, and the reason why I say this, and this is something that I actually had to add to this talk a few years ago, is that in 2014, I recruited a PhD student for a major project I was working on while I was a professor in the UK. And this student was doing a lot of digital work with remote sensing, 3D scanning technologies. And one of the earlier projects that this student did while he was working as an intern for English Heritage is that they were doing 3D laser scanning of monuments sitting in the landscape of North Yorkshire in England. And there was this churchyard in North Yorkshire where there were some standing stones from the Neolithic period, the New Stone Age of Britain. And once they scanned and began to analyze and look at the new 3D model that had been produced from this one standing stone, they discovered that this standing stone wasn't just a large stone that Neolithic peoples had decided to put on display in a vertical position, but that this was actually a fossil, and that embedded within this stone that had been put on display were the remains of a dinosaur. You could no longer see it clearly on the modern stone surface due to erosion and a patina that had grown up and developed on the surface of this stone. But it seems very, very likely that the Neolithic peoples who chose this stone and put this up on display probably could see this fossil, and that actually the presence of this dinosaur within the stone was one of the reasons why the human beings chose this as a stone to use in this particular monumental fashion. Now, the second misconception, though, is that the image presented by popular films like Indiana Jones, Tomb Raider, all these video games, comic books, and movies is really a very far cry from reality. Archaeologists are not grave robbers, and we never go anywhere just to snatch particular artifacts, no matter how valuable, no matter how much they belong in a museum, as Indiana Jones likes to say. Now, that doesn't mean that archaeology isn't without adventure or even danger. And I and many colleagues have some stories we could tell you. But good practice usually very adequately assesses and avoids most of the possible risks. Yes, it's an exciting field, but that danger that we see in these popular presentations is a far cry from reality. Like Indiana Jones, though, we do dig things up, but in much more careful and controlled conditions. But really, most of what we do in archaeology is about making sense of what we find. There is, therefore, a lot more time spent working outside of the excavation trench than there ever is in the trench doing physical digging. And that includes things like being in a library or an archive, reading up on relevant background material, seeking other sites or objects that might be good comparisons for our own sites, things like that. Working elsewhere in the field, collecting environmental or wider landscape data, or time spent in a scientific lab, carrying out a whole range of physical and chemical analyses of the material. And in museums, studying other collections or working to preserve and present the material that we've collected on our individual sites. Importantly, archaeology isn't just a branch of history, or as some historians have called it, the handmaiden of history. I don't know of any archaeologist who likes that definition. Archaeology is a wide-ranging and truly interdisciplinary endeavor. Some have argued, and one way we could describe it is that archaeology is more like the past tense of sociocultural anthropology. And in fact, you'll find that in North America, in the universities of North America, archaeology is usually found within a department of anthropology. And archaeology is considered one of the 4 subfields of anthropology, with sociocultural anthropology, biological or physical anthropology, archaeology, and linguistics representing those 4 fields. So archaeology is the past tense of social anthropology, is a very common way of looking at things. When I teach this in my Intro to Archaeology course and more in-depth archaeology courses, though, I like to spend some time critically thinking about that. I think in a lot of ways this idea is true, but that archaeology is more than a social anthropology approach to the past. Archaeology is absolutely a blend, an interdisciplinary blend of the sciences, social science, the arts, and the humanities. There are many different elements to archaeology. There are many different aspects and areas of focus. But it is important to note that many archaeologists, we're not just jacks of all trades. Most archaeologists do find that we align much more closely with one of these areas than we do the others. Personally, I'm very, very closely aligned with human geography and ancient history as an archaeologist, and less so with the more physical or earth science elements of it. For me, archaeology is fundamentally about connecting what I call the 4 P's: the past, the present, people, and place. In bi-directional ways. It's about connecting the people of the present, us, with the people of the past. It's about connecting the people of the present, us, with the places of the past, and understanding how the places of the present that we inhabit are derivative of, they've grown over time from all those past places that they had once been. And you could think about all sorts of different ways of connecting people and place in the past and the present to each other. And archaeologists really do think about and ask big, bold questions. And we look at the same time while we're asking those big questions. We look at the fine details. We look at tiny things in microscopes. So big, kind of universal, philosophical questions for which we're looking at the tiniest bits of evidence to try to back up, support, think through. Some of these questions, examples include things like, what made us human? How did language develop? Did the Celts really exist? And this is a big controversy that in recent years has even gone back and forth a couple more times. Were there slaves or enslaved peoples within pre-colonial, pre-European conquest America? What did the Romans do for us? And just to give you some indication here, since this is one of my areas of specialty as a specialist of the archaeology and history of the Roman Empire, really studying these topics would help you to critically evaluate some oversimplified presentations of the past that we have within popular media, school curricula, and the wider society. So rather than leave your study of archaeology in this course believing that the Romans were some great advanced or benevolent society that developed great technical innovations with us in mind, archaeology teaches us to make a more critical approach to this, to take a more critical view that lets us pick apart aspects of Rome's imperial ambitions, the oppression of its conquered territories and peoples, and to conclude that while Rome did make some major contributions from which we have benefited, a lot of these contributions were actually stolen from other people, maybe made more obvious, expanded to a larger scale by the Romans, but that most important, we were never in the Romans' minds. Instead, the Romans didn't do anything for us. Rather, they did it for themselves. And a final question that we could think about is, what causes human societies to collapse? And thinking about our place and our present, how can we avoid it? These are some of the things that we think about as archaeologists. Now, archaeology thinks about these big questions, and we look at things in fine detail. There's a lot involved in terms of our methods and the rigor of our work, but archaeology can be incredibly fun and exciting. In fact, the University of Michigan prehistoric archaeologist Kent Flannery has described it as the most fun you can have with your pants on. And here he's specifically talking about the social camaraderie that develops when you work closely with others. Fieldwork can be extremely fun, and even when the work is grueling, and that's frequent, the sense of community and the way that you get to know the individual characters of those people you're working with will raise your spirits and make every single field season an unforgettable experience. Now, a few other things to close out this discussion. Archaeology also, when we think about the past, archaeology covers an immense time span. As the study of the human past based on the physical material remains of the human past, it covers everything from earliest human prehistory all the way up until this very moment. We're all the way up until the present. And archaeology therefore covers an immense time span. In fact, 99+% of the human past is prehistoric. It comes from periods before writing exists. So history, if we think about it as an academic subject, based on the documentation of the past, if it's looking at primary source material, material written at the time in which we're investigating, history only accounts for less than 1% of humanity's experience on our planet. Archaeology, therefore, is the most significant source of information that we have on humanity's long story, providing rich information when textual evidence is not available, and also providing rich evidence when the texts are available. And sometimes, and increasingly so, we're finding that archaeological evidence not only enhances our understandings of historical periods, but often now is serving as a really strong challenge to historical perspectives. Ideas about historical periods that are shaped based off of limited textual evidence. We're now finding that, in many cases, the archaeological material calls a lot of what we thought we knew about those historical periods into question. And it really makes us rethink what we know about the past, how we know about the past, and why all of that matters. Now, archaeology is also really diverse. We can explore archaeological material in urban contexts, and here you can see on the left of this image, excavation of a Roman site under the heart of urban London, one of the largest cities in the world, with towering skyscraper structures to either side. And then on the right, you can see another Roman town from the same time period, buried beneath a nondescript cornfield in East Sussex, just an hour outside of London. So, very different context for archaeological materials in ruined cities in the middle of vibrant modern cities, out in the middle of seemingly nowhere. Archaeological material can be explored. And archaeological fieldwork is incredibly diverse. Archaeology encompasses a number of different fields, which are united by methods and approaches. And the time periods that we investigate span from the Paleolithic, millions of years ago, all the way up to and including the 21st century. While most people think about archaeology as the distant past, there has been, particularly over recent decades, a growing interest in the archaeology of the recent and contemporary past. Those very, very recent periods, even including yesterday's garbage. And within the broad field of archaeology, archaeologists will specialize in different time periods and or different methodological approaches. Ethnoarchaeology is one example, a major specialization where archaeologists live amongst contemporary communities to understand how they use material culture so that we can apply that to the past. This is maybe getting close to that definition of archaeology as the past tense of sociocultural anthropology. This is where people are both sociocultural anthropologists and archaeologists, trying to figure out how that information we can gain from modern living societies really informs us about past societies. And archaeologists carry out so many different types of fieldwork, from the typical excavation that archaeology is most well known for, to new non-invasive remote sensing techniques, like a wide range of geophysical survey, photogrammetry, and 3D laser scanning, both on the ground and in the air. And we also spend significant time, actually far more time than we ever do in the field collecting data. We spend more time in the laboratory analyzing that data. Materials need to be cleaned, they need to be sorted, they need to be recorded, analyzed, dated, cross-referenced, etc. And all of these tasks have particular specialists: archaeobotanists, zooarchaeologists, DNA and stable isotope analysts, geospatial technicians, database admins, computer scientists, statisticians, etc. And nobody is an expert on all things archaeology. Now, if archaeology is the study of the human past, and we're wrapping up here, if archaeology is the study of the human past using the physical or material remains of that past, what constitutes those remains? Now, for our purposes, I'd like us to consider archaeological evidence as falling into 4 distinct categories. Artifacts, perhaps the best known of all archaeological materials. These are best defined as portable, or that is relatively easily movable, transportable objects that have been made or modified by human beings. In this class of archaeological material is vast, and it includes anything and everything that is made or modified by people. Common examples include things like pottery, tools, jewelry, clothing, figurines, weapons, etc. And from a true archaeological perspective, these objects don't even need to be old in order to be an artifact. Your pen, notepad, computer, mandolin pick, phone, purse, comb, wallet, debit card, all of these things are artifacts of the present. The second category is what we call ecofacts. Now, ecofacts are less frequently considered to be a part of the archaeological record by non-archaeologists, but they are crucial pieces of evidence. And ecofacts, are organic and environmental remains, which can reveal a lot about past human activity. Ecofacts include human skeletons, animal bones, plant remains, soils, sediments, even human waste. Poo, for example, can tell us an awful lot about past peoples, their diets, their health, their life, their society. The third class is called features. Now, this is probably the most difficult class of archaeological material for new archaeological students to get their minds wrapped around. Features are this wide range, a kind of catch-all category for human-made, non-portable things. Things such as hearths, kilns, ovens, almost like negative things like post holes, storage or garbage pits. And in the case of pits and potholes, post holes, the feature itself may not actually exist anymore, but we can often identify these through excavation, as in the case of the unlined water storage cistern that's featured here in this image for features. And if you look at this image, you can see that the pit itself can easily be identified in cross-section because it was later filled in by a different soil material after the pit itself went out of use for its original water storage purpose. Features may be one of the more complicated and difficult to assess categories of archaeological evidence, but they, again, remain quite crucial. And the fourth category, which sometimes archaeologists will count these as features, because they are non-portable human-made things, but I like to separate them out as a special class of features. These are structures, human-made buildings or works of architecture that usually consist of an enclosed space that may or may not be fully enclosed, and that may or may not be enclosed with a roof. But there's a difference between a house and an oven, for example. And structures can range from the large, grand scale of things like temples and palaces, to the more mundane, things like granaries, houses, storage sheds, and even outhouses. And structures may be permanent in design or only intended for short-term, temporary uses. So archaeology is primarily focused upon the material, physical remains of the past. We can break those down into four distinct categories of artifacts, ecofacts, features, and structures. And when we bring these together, where we find places where we have artifacts, features, structures, and ecofacts found together, we consider these to be sites and archaeological sites. And when we find sites, we tend to try to study them not just in isolation, but in terms of their wider surrounding landscape. We'll group them into regions. And when we think about it this way, sites can exist at multiple scales. We can have a scatter of artifacts, a small single burial site, a rural outpost, a farm, a small village, a town, a trading post, a city, a temple complex, a mega city, etc. Now, a location with just one single piece of archaeological evidence, a single bone or bead, for example, doesn't usually constitute as an archaeological site, although the find spot and location of the object will remain important. But a site is usually a location where multiple, in some cases maybe only two, pieces of archaeological evidence are found together in some sort of relationship to each other. So that's been a rather quick overview of some introductory concepts. We looked at the term history. We've identified that as being something different from old times, times that have already occurred. History is itself humanity's documentation of the past, the things we say about the past. And it can also be viewed as an academic subject that explores the past based on documentary evidence that exists for the past. We've learned that archaeology is also a study of the past that focuses in on the physical, non-textual, non-documentary evidence of the past, and that it includes a wide range of evidence types and a wide range of disciplines that, from science to art to social science and humanities, that fit in. Closely connected to history, but archaeology and history are different things. They both center in on the past, which is really all, anything and everything that has ever happened from the beginning of time all the way up to this very moment. And one thing I would like to encourage you to look at, and if you're in a course with me, I will provide you with copies of this. This is the historical thinking chart developed by the Stanford History Education Group. Now, this is specifically designed to provide a number of reading skills, questions, critical thinking elements that historians will use as we look at documents from the past. Historians don't just accept a narrative because some old document tells us that something happened in a certain way or that certain people did things. It's not good enough that the document is old. Instead, we have a very critical way that we look at things, paying attention to who's the author, what's the source, what do we know about the source, and how and why does what we know about the source matter in terms of the way that we evaluate, understand, and appreciate this document. We also look at all of these documents in terms of the context. What do we know more broadly about the when and the where that this document came from, and how does the information that we know about the when and the where affect the way that we understand that document and what it means and the value that it provides us. We also don't just accept any one single piece of evidence, but we look for a collection of various evidence types that generally corroborate the overall narrative. If you think about it in terms of a court case, eyewitness accounts are excellent. Multiple eyewitness accounts are even better. And it's really good if you're a prosecutor, for example, if your eyewitness accounts are generally saying the same thing. It's not good for your case if you have multiple contradictory eyewitness accounts. And historians think about the past in this way. And close reading, basically paying attention to the details. It's not just the big overarching narrative that counts, but every word choice could very much matter in terms of really understanding that text. Now, while this historical thinking chart has been largely put together to think through how historians evaluate primary source texts, we can also think about the way that archaeologists approach the evidence we collect for the past in very much the same kind of critical way, understanding where this stuff came from, the context from an archaeological perspective. Did this come from a particular site at a particular time? How was it collected? What information do we know about the methodology? All that stuff can fit in under the source. Why did the excavator dig where the excavator dig? What were they looking for? What were their motivations? Context. What more broadly do we know about the place, the period, etc.? Corroboration. Is there other evidence that we can look at? Do we have ecofacts and artifacts and textual documents from history that we can look at that might all corroborate a particular view? And then finally, the details matter. So thinking through archaeology and history, the way we explore the past, these aren't done just by blindly accepting one or two accounts, but critically thinking through all of the evidence, weighing and sifting until we can come up with the most logical, best account that we can come up with, all backed up with evidence. So, at this point, you may very well have questions. Do feel free to ask these questions in the comments section below. Ask them in any live course meeting that we may have, or feel free to contact me online via email, via my website, or social media. That's all we have time for today. I hope that this was interesting, that you've learned something new, and or that you've been challenged to think in a different way about the past and the roles and methods of history and archaeology. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care of yourself and take care of each other.